Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. I'm Nerdarchist Dave, and today I've got the DMG info with me in the middle of the night. Gareth, how are you doing today, sir?
Excellent, Dave. Excellent. And you over there?
Good. You are probably my favorite South African that lives in Australia. I just want you to know that.
Well, so my mom says the same thing when my brother has been a douchebag.
Yeah. Well, there's always qualifiers. There's always qualifiers. Um, yeah, so we've been like internet friends for a long time, and we recently even got to meet in person, which was super cool. You've been
It
super
was
helpful.
fabulous. Yeah.
You've been super helpful for to Nerdarchy from the very beginning. Lending your expertise and advice, and just in generally being a great friend. We really appreciate that.
And you to me, man. It's a two-way relationship, and I'm thankful to you for all the things you've done for me over the years as well.
So we first became aware of your channel. You were doing D&D terrain videos. What was it? The two you call it the 2.5?
Yeah, DM Scotty created the 2.5D videos,
Uh-huh.
2.5D method. Um, and then I ripped off his idea. He knows the story, so it's all good. Yeah, I saw one of his videos in 2013, and within 2 weeks I'd started a channel. I was like, "This, let's do this, man."
All the cardboard began being harvested, and you were
That's right.
still you were still in South Africa when you started the channel, right?
No, no, no. I was in Australia at that point. I'd been in Australia about 10 years, 10, 11 years when I started my channel.
Oh, I'm
Um,
completely off.
yeah, yeah, no. No, I came to Australia in 2002, so it was even pre-YouTube in those. I didn't think, did we have mobile phones back then, man?
Yeah, yeah, that's way back in the day. But you also have a bit of film experience as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I have 2 degrees in film. I have an honors degree in documentary film theory and practice, and a master's degree in also film theory and practice, but it's in the narrative film. So one is documentary, and the other one is normal movies that people watch. So I'm a veteran of probably about 40 something short films, 3 documentaries, and at this point, well over 2,500 YouTube videos, not just on my channel.
That's a lot, it's not nerdarchy level a lot, but it's a lot. Well, I think we're
So
sitting
you
at
guys take the cake.
we're sitting at 3,300 videos now, and I don't know. If you want to get good at something, just keep doing it over and over again. We're still trying to figure out which number makes us good at it. It's not 3,000, but we're working. I'll let you know 4,000. Every 1,000, we'll check back in and see if we're good at it yet or not.
So yeah, they say it's 10,000 hours to become good at something. So if each video is an hour long, then you still got a few videos to go.
That you know what? That actually is a good point. So,
Yeah.
for people that are not familiar with you, do you want to kind of give them a primer and let them know all the stuff you're into? Because there's actually a bunch of stuff you're part of.
So so what obviously people mainly know me from is the DMG.info, the DMG info, which is my crafting channel. That's the big one that everyone knows. Then I have a collaborative channel with the craft father DM Scotty, who obviously more people will know Scotty than they'll know me. But he and I share a channel called Quest Givers, where we actually create system neutral content for role playing games. We have several on our website, questgivers.com. We have several modules. One of our modules you guys have on your website, I believe, as well, which has been D&Dized by Ted. Yeah, that's been quite good for us, getting into sort of that side of the content, because crafting, as a crafting creator, people don't see you as anything more than you're a guy who makes cool terrain. They don't really see your ability as a dungeon master and that kind of thing. So that channel was more about putting out our years of experience in dungeon mastering, and putting out products that support the way that we like to play games. And then I've developed my own game, which is 7D System, which you and Ted have played when we met. And that's sort of been a passion project of mine, which, everyone has a game in them. And I know you guys are like, why reinvent the wheel? But, it's one of those things you have to get out of your system. And that's been a lot of fun. I have been slowly making changes to that system, because there's basically two variants of it. The variant you played was the more sort of hardcore combat rule system, where I'm developing a lighter rule system where you don't have to do all the sort of maneuvers and things that we were doing when we played. But even then, it wasn't a slow game. It was just consistently the comments, people are going, oh, well, if there was a more streamlined combat version, it would probably be picked up easier. So before I release the game, I'm coming up with the light version, and then there's also the hardcore mode.
Like kind of like Fate has Fate Core and Fate Accelerated. No,
yeah.
So we had an opportunity to play the 7D system. It was fun. I've actually brought it up on some of these live chats because of some of the unique leveling methods that are involved in that game, which I really enjoy. So because the system works using all the dice from your standard polyhedral set, and the lower the die, the better you are at something. And the die is actually your attribute, which is really cool. So if you're not good at it, you have to roll a d20. In order to get a success, you need ones to roll ones. So obviously the d4 makes it a lot easier. But the way the system works, that I found really fascinating, is when you fail, you gain XP, right? And if you fail enough, then your die will then decrease, making you better at it. Till the smaller the die, the harder it is to get better at the skill. So that that part was really cool. And also, I will say, like, we are kind of like, why reinvent the wheel? Except for if you have something cool and interesting and have a reason to do it. Like I've seen people go and like create a system and create a game, and I'll go like, well, why'd you do this particular thing that way? And they're like, and then the answer is like, to be different. I'm like, different than what? Why? Like, it has to serve a purpose. And we just haven't found a purpose in making our own game yet.
Well, when I initially developed the game, it was, when you've been playing role-playing games for a very long time, D&D, you use the D20s a lot, and then you use some of the other ones, and you rarely use a D12 and you rarely use a D8. So you've got, when you're someone like me and you've bought 10-pounder dices on on eBay and Amazon, you got a lot of dice you want to use, right? And then all the ones that consistently roll low, is like, these dice are terrible, I'm never going to use them, throw them away, because you're always chasing that 20. And so for me, it was about a mechanics of, how does one incorporate actually using these in a way where it's not really gimmicky, it's actually something that actually makes sense why you would use all these dice. And so I thought, well, what do all the dice have in common, so that you have a common thread going through them, and they all have ones and twos on them. So I thought, okay, well, the only sort of gimmicky thing in it would be a D2, which you can use any dice as a D2. And then you have D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D20. And then you look at the statistic or the probabilities that come in, and then that gives you your difficulties. So the more difficult something is, the more faces the dice should have. So the most difficult thing would be a D20. And then I looked at, should I incorporate weird things like D32s, and because you can if you wanted to, but then it really does get ridiculous.
where does it end at that point?
That's right.
Yeah.
So the 7D in 7D system is 7 dice, 7 levels of difficulty. And what I always love in games is when you cast a big fireball and you pick up that big bowl of D6s and throw it, you really feel like you've got some power when you're doing that. And I really wanted that sort of visceral feel of you actually holding your character in your hand when you're doing that. So the better you are at something, the more dice you get. So you're like, I'm really, really good at jumping. I'm going to throw 5 of these things. And what came about in the early testing is that you don't have to have characters that are all at the same level playing together, which is something I always had a problem with D&D. You can't have a level 1 and a level 12 character in the same party. It doesn't work. Whereas with this, because the difficulty that you say, okay, well, the difficulty is 1, everyone's going to roll D2s. If difficulty 4, everyone rolls D8s. The people who are better roll more D8s than the people who are not. You don't have to be adjusting the difficulty of everything in order for the game to still work. So that means your game is more porous. You can bring in new players, have old characters, new characters. So that was something that was very important early on in having that sort of porous game, because not everyone can be at the game every time. And then you'd find the games would fall apart because 2 out of the 4 people rocked up this week.
Well, so the other thing too that was really fun that's incorporated in this system is the opportunity to fail spectacularly. How did you come up with that idea?
Well, I love the botch system from the World of Darkness. I can't remember which version it is, but I played Vampire in the early 2000s, late 1990s, and when you botched and you had a lot of botches, then like really bad stuff started happening. Well, at least our DM made some really bad stuff happen. But he would always, if like really, really bad things had happened, he would always give you certain choices. And I love the idea of having choices as to what actually happens to your character rather than just the random dice, determining that, okay, now you've lost your arm or something like that. If you make the decision for that to happen, you've made it cool. Whereas if the dice make the decision to make that happen, then you have the bad taste in your mouth. So really it comes down to, instead of you rolling a crit or rolling a botch, when you succeed or when you fail, you can then choose to fail spectacularly or succeed spectacularly. So you then control when that actually happens. And then you get rewarded for adding to the story when you fail. So when, as you guys did, where Ted was failing his roles, and there was the woman fell in love with his character instantly because he got his super success. But then one of the other players, Susan, who's DM Scotty's wife, when she failed on her sniper shot, she accidentally shot the woman in the head. And so you had this, all these things were happening because players were choosing for that to happen rather than the dice determining that that's what the case was, which to me makes the game far more interesting and more memorable.
Or even worse is the GM just kind of arbitrary deciding that these terrible things happen, because at a certain point it starts feeling less like the story and more like the GM is just picking on particular people or things, or just making bad things happen to you. But when the players actually get to jump in there and take initiative and do that, it does feel a lot better. So there's a couple questions. Josh wants to know, so what stories have you guys written for D&D so far? So you do Quest Givers, which is system agnostic. What number are you guys up to? I know you guys did a Kickstarter and compiled them.
There are 12 in the first series, of which the first, I think it's 7, are on the website. So the Kickstarter was for a physical book and a PDF, which we're just doing the layouts for all of that. So all the 12 are done, the artwork, everything is done. Although we're revising artwork because I have a medical condition that I found out about in February, and my level of concentration has not been what it should be. And so that's slowed everything down for us. But I'm getting back into the swing of things at the moment. But so there's 12 in that arc, and then there's another series we're beginning to work on that comes after that, which is a separate storyline. But the way we like to do things is, although there's 12 modules in the story arc, each one operates as an individual adventure that you can use separately from the rest. Each one has a separate kind of style to it. So you can, so it's not like it's the same thing over and over and over again. But yeah, it's obviously there's a lot of videos on Quest Givers where we talk about our modules and we talk about how to play role playing games, as you guys do as well. So it's that sort of thing, but we tend to talk about it referencing our own work, so that because there's a lot of channels that talk about D&D specifically, whereas we like to talk about role playing games in general. So it's that's our sort of point of difference, is that our work is system agnostic, is system neutral. And we've had people that have used our modules in different genres. So the first 12 are really sort of fantasy, but we've had people play it in Star Wars, and we've had people play it in modern times and that sort of thing. So
Can you touch on any of the particular themes, or maybe your favorite theme from a particular module?
So when I was in America, I ran number 10, which is On the Run, which is basically the entire module is one chase scene. So you're being chased by this wheel of death, literal wheel of death, down a mountainside, and so you've got these nuns on the top who who have magic and are basically firing magic at you the whole time. And the whole module is you basically rolling down this mountainside, in all the different things that happen in chase scenes in movies is this whole module. So that's really On the Run. That's the 10th one. But the first one, which is available on your website, nerdarchy.com, is Death and Taxes, which is basically the first where you arrive in a small fishing village sort of thing, the usual kind of fare. And you immediately start to notice that there's something very different about the society, and there's sort of things that are going wrong, and there's a horrible tax collector who's about to arrive, and so it sets up the whole story. And then it moves on to, like, the next one is a more political sort of, there's all kinds of weird things happening in this nearby town. And then the third one is you're lost in a wood, so you're trying to find this rebel group that that's part of the political thing from the second one. And then the fourth one, you find you come across this strange circus sort of thing, which is a group of retired knights who run the circus in the middle of nowhere. And that's more about puzzles and getting to become part of this order of knights so that you can help out this problem. So that these are the sort of things that it does. It's each one is different, but it's got that thread of the same society, same story that runs through everything. And they're very, very different, because we're one of the only modules that we know of where we actually include dialogue of all the characters. So there's variation. You can ask the characters a question, has all the answers to all the questions for all the characters in the character's voice. So you as a DM, you don't have to try to come up on the fly with what this person would say. It's all there in the module for you, which is kind of unique. I don't really know of many others that do that. So that's also something cool about them.
Yeah, I imagine that can be useful too. Like, even if they ask a question that isn't programmed in there per se, you still get the character's voice to kind of understand how they talk and how they do things to kind of go from, which is pretty cool.
For me, as a writer and as a filmmaker and all that sort of thing, the characters are what make the world. The NPCs are what make the world. So to me, that's the most important function in a module, should be what the NPCs say, because they're the ones who are relating information. They're the ones who are twisting things. They're the ones that are actually making the world feel real. And I think that's one of the key things we've had with people. The feedback that we get is people say, you immediately get a sense of this world, of what it is and what, because you get to interact with all these characters, and there's a coherent stance coming from all these things. And even if there are rumors and that sort of thing going around, there's consistency in that, and that consistency of voice and and the way that people are reacting to things underlies the whole story that goes over all 12. So that for GMs it's much easier because you don't have to try to remember what happened or what someone said in the first module because that's being consistently held through all of them.
So can we go back to these nuns trying to kill the
Yeah.
players on a giant death wheel?
It's a good one, isn't it?
That is pretty good. Murder nuns.
Yeah, murder nuns.
Yeah, you kind of had you had me at nuns trying to kill the players riding a death wheel. I don't even
Yep.
know what that looks like. Are they so I have a couple of versions in my head. One is they're running on top of the wheel, flinging magic from it, circus style, or they're in it like a hamster wheel.
Yeah, there's Drex. Drex are the sort of spiny goblin type creatures. So we don't really say, okay, well, here's a goblin and here are the stats. We say, well, this is a creature. It has a spiny back and sort of bat ears. And you can then put your own stats into it. So because we don't know what level you're going to be playing at, we're just giving you the scenario and a creature you can use in the scenario, and then you dump the stats that you need for your game into it. And so these creatures are inside the wheel and they're running on the wheel to power it. And then these sort of these dark nuns, they're from the Dark Sisterhood, right? Who are the running bad guys throughout the whole thing, bad girls. So you, at this point, you've just busted out of their main temple in the mountains, which is the previous module. So you kind of like get out at the top, and that's where all their death wheels were being built. And so they've got a few of these things that they can then, they come after you. You find this cart, so you jump in the cart, and of course the horses have run away. So you've got to push the cart and run, because it's the only way to get down. You can run, but most people are going to jump onto the cart, and so you use the cart, and then you've got to try and steer the cart, and so there's all these kinds of things happening, that it's just creating chaos that's the fun sort of stuff that you enjoy from movies. Where you've got the sharp turns, you've got the low tree limbs that you've got to duck under. There's the whole thing from Speed where there's the piece missing. You've got to jump over the ravine. All this sort of stuff is in there. So
it sounds fun, and I'm loving the idea of the evil organization run by dark nuns. And the idea that their big plan to conquer the world are these giant death wheels. I have no idea if my headcanon links up with the adventure itself, but that's
we don't explain a lot of that. We basically just have the things there, but there's enough kind of like bits and pieces that we mention that you can formulate your own idea of what's happening, but we don't like to explain what's actually happening, because you want the players to come up with their own, I can see what's happening, when we don't even know what's happening. It's just it's things that events that occur. We like an event driven narrative. So event happens, then another event happens, and another event happens, and the path between those events the players are really making up. So it's people would say, oh no, well, it's a railroad. Well, it's not. It's kind of like we've put towns on a map with no roads, and you've got to get from town to town.
that definitely sounds like a lot of fun. So would you run that at Mace?
Yeah, Mace in Charlotte, North Carolina. So that was my first big convention, and was it was a lot of fun because we had people that I'd known digitally for years. You're meeting for the first time. It's like only in the modern age can you have a friend that you've known for a decade. And meet them for the first time.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the cool thing about what we do, is meeting all these people from all over the world, hanging out with them, getting to play games, and then eventually, someday, possibly, maybe even meeting them in person, to play games with them. So, someone just asked about the models on the shelf. Well, this is a green screen of our set, so Ted would have to answer you on those questions. So you said Mace is your first big convention,
Yeah.
and
And it's not a big convention, but for me, it's more than 10 people, so that's big.
it's all relative. And Mace is more of like a wargamer convention.
Yeah.
Cool.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's, I would say, look, obviously it's my first experience, but I would say it was a good sort of dipping my toe into conventions. I didn't want to do like the Gen Con thing and be completely overwhelmed and never want to do it again. Um, my sort of life goal is to do Gary Con. But Gen Con is on the list, but I think I would only really go there as a vendor. Um, uh, I'd like the vendor experience in Gen Con, but not the attendance experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I do cons, it's a little different, I guess, because I do it as Nerdarchy, and like I only really have two like agendas when I go to the convention. One is to kind of like further Nerdarchy and its business stuff, and the other is just to hang out with my internet friends. So it ends up being a combination of that. So rarely do I actually do convention stuff.
Yeah.
If Gary Con is on your list, then I would also add Gamehole Con.
Gamehole. Yeah, no, I've heard of Gamehole. I know a few people that go there. So
I
yeah, I
feel,
mean, I'm on a small island in the middle of the Pacific. So we do have conventions here, and got one of my fans who used to live almost across the road from me,
yeah.
and he was like, "You got to come to this one in Melbourne. You got to come to this one in Melbourne." And each year, I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I'll come this year. I'll come this year." And I feel like a total ass because I never end up going. But um, it's to me the community aspect of it is probably the biggest draw card to something. And if I'm going to go to a convention, I want to go to a convention where I know people there. Um, because if I don't know, I'm not a person who likes crowds. Because I grew up in South Africa, I was caught in a riot when I was 12, and so I've seen crowds turn. And so when you talk about 30,000 people in a confined space in a convention center, that freaks me out. I'm like, no, I can handle 2,000. That's about enough. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I could see how that could be daunting. So Raven doesn't live very far from you. Well, relatively speaking. I believe they're in the OZ. So he wants to know if you're going to attend any cons there.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember there's one in Melbourne early in the year every year. I can't remember the name of it. I'm terrible when it comes to these kinds of things. Um, but yeah, look, I probably will. But I'm more known in America. 90% of my audience is American, so I know sort of the community who knows me and the people that I know are Americans. And so that's why I did my epic drive across the states. Because I wanted to see more of America. I'd done it once before for my honeymoon. We drove across the US, and when I came again, I wanted to do it again, and I will do it again. People still think I'm crazy, but
You've seen more of the United States now than probably most of the people that live here.
yeah. I mean, I've been to when they talk about small town America where it's like population 100. I've been to a few of those. I've talked to the people that like, I went into this one bar, and this lady, we got to chatting, and she said, well, my family settled here in the 1800s when they put the railroad through, and we've been here the whole time, and 90% of this town is my family, literally.
That can't be good for the gene pool. So Kabo wants to know any interesting, weird, or favorite terrain pieces.
Oh,
You've made a few over the years, I would
I
say.
have made a few. I'm very guilty of not making more than what you see in the videos because, like other crafters, if you watch Black Magic Craft and that sort of thing, you basically when you're doing a channel, if you're going to do a craft, you're going to, well, I might as well make a video out of this. So pretty much everything I've done, I've put on my channel, bar a few that I just thought weren't up to scratch. But The weirdest one, I think I did I don't know if I don't know if I ever, I did put it out publicly because it was a celebration of something or other. And I did this magical death machine using Christmas ornaments. Um, and that was weird and wonderful because most of my stuff is generic modular things. So there's not one sort of set piece that stands out other than that one, which I got down in the purple glitter on that one because that's one of my favorite things to use. Which you don't really want to be a terrain maker with purple glitter, but there you go.
Purple
The bling, yo.
purple glitter. If you're going to do it, don't. Why would you even bother if you're not using purple glitter?
That's right. If
You
it's
heard it
going to be
here.
magical, it's going to be purple glitter. That's for sure.
Makes sense. Why not? So, are you getting much gaming in?
Oh, at the moment, no. I'm super busy at the moment.
Because I,
My business is computer problem solving. So with everyone working from home, everyone's having computer problems. So I'm run off my feet at the moment. Um,
Yeah, because I know you do. You've got that business. You have a couple channels that you run, and then that people would see, and then there's a bunch of them where you do the behind the scenes stuff. Where
yeah, there's 4 where I'm the face of the channel, and there's 12 that I'm not. Um, and so people wouldn't know, other than watching the credits and seeing my name in the credits, sort of thing. They wouldn't know that I was involved in those channels. But yeah, as we were talking before the show started, I before I started my channel, I was helping other people with their channels. Um, and when YouTube began monetizing everyone's channels, there was a huge surge in the number of people who were starting YouTube channels. And at first it was like free advice to friends and that sort of thing. And then it became something where I was actually charging people, this is how you should do this and this is how you should do that, and structure the actual videos. I didn't know so much about the thumbnails and all that kind of stuff, and I have SEO knowledge, so I was helping people with how they should be titling it and the descriptions and so on and so forth. um, and so and then I was very, very sick one day, and I was in bed, and I was just looking for dungeon tiles, and I found DM Scotty's channel. And yeah, and the rest is now the DMG, and everything else that I do came from that 1 week of terrible flu, which pales into comparison to what's happening at the moment. But it's got to be a journey story, isn't it?
So, how did you get into role playing games? Because I know your experience is way different than most of the people that I know.
My mom had a friend whose son was about 3 or 4 years older than me, and he was consistently getting academic scholarships and all this sort of thing. And he was heavy into D&D and programming computers. And I was already friends with him in computer programming and ZX Spectrums, if anyone remembers the old ZX Spectrum in the 80s. Um, I was heavy into that and programming and basic on that and that sort of thing. And he was doing this D&D stuff. And my mom said, oh, you should do this, not knowing what it was, had no idea what it was. Just this guy did it. He is smart and getting academic scholarships. So I'm not going to say no to you wanting to do D&D. Little did she know that it would be like an all-consuming lifelong thing. But yeah, so my initial thing was, it was a couple of friends of mine. We didn't have any of the rule books or anything like that at that point. I think only after about 2 years of playing D&D did we actually get a D&D book. Most of it was just, we kind of knew how the game was supposed to work, and we just made up rules. And then, so when we were like about 13, 14, we then actually picked up D&D books. And found out that the rules were wackadoo. So we played vanilla D&D for all of a week, and then just started going back to our other rule systems. But it was difficult to get. You couldn't just go to your local shop and buy a D&D book. There were no local game stores. There was one like esoteric store that sold, maybe 1 or 2 books, and that was it. Because South Africa was a very different place in the 80s and the 90s. So, if you didn't play rugby and cricket, then what were you doing with your life? And so it was very difficult to find players. If you didn't have a group of friends who just played D&D, it's not like you could, jump on the internet and find players. That wasn't, and in that environment, when the whole satanic panic started happening in America, South Africa was also very, very Christian. And so the school, when they found out that we were playing this game, we were basically banned from having anything to do with it at school, for no other reason other than they'd heard that there was Satanism was involved with it. And so you're like, so then you're thinking, but this is ridiculous. It's just like no one bans Tolkien, and so it became like this thing that you never told people that you did, which is an experience that some people have had in the rest of the world. But here, in South Africa, Satanism was something where you could go to prison if they thought that you were actually practicing anything regarding, that sort of thing. So, it was, there was that kind of, and I mean, South Africa is a weird, strange kind of culture and place in that transitional period in the early to mid 90s. And as I said, I got caught in a riot when I was 12, and that was 1990, I think. It was just after Mandela was released. So yeah, it's been a very strange road in the beginning, and then it became more normal until I started going onto YouTube.
Well, I will say 2/3 of the South Africans I know have left that country.
Yeah.
and all three of them are YouTubers to some degree or another.
Our greatest export is our people. We're like the new Irish. We're everywhere. We're in. If mining and agriculture, there's a South African there. Business, South Africans are there. So that's what we do.
So I guess, needless to say, the D&D scene or the RPG scene is much better in Australia than South Africa.
Yeah, it's still not big, so it's not like in small town America, when I was driving along, I was visiting game shops because to me, that's a weird kind of experience to go to game shops. There are, I think, 4 in Sydney. With population, I think it's like 6 million in Sydney. So it's not a small city. But yeah, there are only sort of 4 main game shops. I mean, there might be some smaller outfits but most of them are just card games that don't sell RPG books and things like that. But there's definitely more players. There's definitely more people. Like you bump into the street and you start talking, say, oh, and I play D&D. Oh, so do I. There's a lot more of that. And especially now, obviously, as it's become bigger. But it didn't have this, when I was here and I started playing with my housemate, he introduced people from work, and there wasn't that sort of stigma. There wasn't that, oh, this is that satanic game from the 80s. You didn't have that, which for me was a new experience. So, and then I've been to Japan many times, and obviously Guy, who you had, or Guy, I wonder if he calls himself Guy or if he's a Guy. But anyway, he's in Japan at the moment. But when I went to Japan, that's a culture that really embraces this kind of thing. And so I felt very at home in Japan in the cultural aspects of the kinds of things that I'm interested in computers and role-playing games and miniatures and all that sort of stuff. You felt like that it was just accepting of that that's just what people do. So life is a weird and wonderful experience. And if you haven't traveled, I say that you should travel.
Guy has actually migrated once again. He is now in the UK.
Is he in the UK? Oh, yeah. Because he works in the media. I think he does full time now. YouTube.
He does full time YouTube now, and he was in Japan for a while. And it's more recent, within the last couple of months, that he's just moved to the UK.
You can't tell because he's always on a green screen, so he doesn't go outside.
I think he had to prove that he was a colonizer to get back into the UK.
That's right.
So.
Well, I mean, I know quite a few South Africans, and I YouTube, for them, being a YouTuber can be very good money, because if you're catering to an American audience and you're earning sort of US dollars in South Africa, that's big money. So you don't need to have hundreds of thousands of subscribers to be working full time. You could have 10,000 subscribers and be working full time. for a lot of people, that's a way of earning a living in that kind of country. But you know, it's I mean, you look at Joe Rogan, just got $100 million to move his catalog onto Spotify. So that really legitimizes what it is that we do. You know, this is not just something some people on the internet. You know, that someone's willing to pay $100 million for, you know, a guy sitting around talking to people. Kind of legitimizes what we're actually doing right now. This has value. This really does. You know, like people do want to have this kind of content, and they really do, you know, and so a lot more people are kind of waking up to the idea of YouTube as a career or as something to do to actually, you know, feed their family. It's still got a long way to go. It is still, you know, in its infancy, but it is becoming more and more legitimate now.
I can vouch that it has a long way to go as a full-time YouTuber.
Yeah.
When I went full time, I cut my salary in half essentially from what I was doing before. But on the plus side, I don't have to dodge tractor trailers anymore, so I like that part.
Yeah, no, like, you know, I'm running 16 channels and I'm still not making it enough to quit my day job, even though I own the company. You know, so
No, I definitely feel you there. So, when we went out to Ohio, you were there hanging out with DM Scotty, and you ran a, was it called XCOM style game?
yeah. So I'm a huge fan of the original UFO computer game. It's one of my favorite things in the world to still go and play every variant of that game that's ever been made, including the original, which I have an old computer that I run it on just to play UFO. And so no one had ever wanted to run that game. So when you guys said, yeah, let's do XCOM, I'm like, yes!
Yeah,
Actually, I had done it on my channel with some of my Patreon supporters on 70 System. I had done that exact thing that you played. I'd done that. So if you want to see what other people did, you can go and check that out.
nice. Yeah, I think you threw out a couple options, and I was like, let's do that. Because whenever I get the opportunity to play, and someone's willing to run something that isn't D&D, then I definitely I gravitate towards non-fantasy anyway, just because like that's mostly what we play is D&D and the fantasy genre. So it's like, let's do something else. I know, like when we were talking about getting together and we're kind of like pre-gaming stuff, and like and Ted's like, I guess we could play D&D. I'm like, no, absolutely not. I'm like, for one, you know, you've got your own game. I'm like, let's play that, so I can experience something different. And then like anything but fantasy, please. But we got some fantasy into because DM Scotty ran his game.
Yeah, I love DM Scotty's system as well. It's very simple. It's DM Scotty's easy D6 system. It is really easy, and it's really designed for sitting around and having fun with your friends at a convention, you know, like crazy wackadoo one shot. And I must say, you know, he is one of the best people when it comes to DMing like a terrain based one shot. We did this at Mace. It's probably one of my best experiences in my life is sitting with Jeremy from Black Magic Craft. He and I playing some wackadoo characters in this weird futuristic space on a planet, like with killer robotic teddy bears. You know, it sounds like it's crazy, but it was crazier than you think. And this whole like teddy bear themed, it was just incredible. There's no real words to describe how cool that game was. Scotty is a genius when it comes to that sort of thing. And you know, like I was a fan of his before I was a friend of his, and I'm still a fan of his. I'm still like, oh, a new DM Scotty video, even though I know what he's going to be putting out because he's, you know, we talk behind the scenes like all the time. So I know what's coming up, but I still want to like, wow, this is going to be cool.
I saw the pictures that came out of Mace for that.
Yeah.
And they were amazing. I don't know where people can find that. Maybe in the archives of the Crafters Guild or something. But
yeah, the Tabletop Crafters Guild, to find something that was like a year ago would be very, very difficult because there's like 150 posts a day, I think. On that.
Yeah, it would be super hard. But I bet if you asked, someone would be able to point you in the direction. But that terrain looked amazing, and the system is a lot of fun. It's a D6. you for your character you get an index card, but literally once you write down what your character can do and what your character is, you could probably just throw away the index card because it is like that simple.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a fun system to play in. I mean, we had fun with both of them.
Yeah. No, he's been talking about doing a one where it's a space race where you're in this you got to compete in this race with the spaceships, and you go through different terrain things on this weird sort of space track. He's been developing that for a while, and everything he talks about just absolutely incredible. The kind of stuff that comes out of his mind, and it's one of life's real pleasures is to work with someone who's that creative, who can because it's not just the terrain that Scott is good at, it's the whole idea and concept behind why you're using this stuff in the first place. And that's what really attracted me to his channel in the first place, because it wasn't just a guy cutting cardboard and go, there you go, there's a dungeon. You get a sense of there's so much more to the creativity of what this person is putting out. And, even though I've known Scotty for years and I spent an entire week, we haven't even begun to plumb the depths of what that guy is capable of doing. And, you've been in his basement, so you kind of seen...
DM Scotty's basement has more stuff in it than game stores I've been to. So, and it's just organized really well. Hands down, DM Scotty is one of the best DMs that I've played in their game for sure. And also to see him use the terrain is, it is the difference between watching, I don't know, someone do amateur, any kind of sport, and a professional. It is truly amazing.
And it's one of those things which unfortunately wouldn't really translate well into a stream, because lots of people you should stream it. He has done quite a few streams on his channel, and I've watched all of those streams. But again, when the difference is being in the game and watching the game are two completely different experiences. And you're not getting, because you can't see everybody and you can't see the nuances of what he's doing and all that kind of stuff. He really puts the master in Dungeon Master. The DM in my name is deranged minion. He is Dungeon Master. But yeah, he is a fantastic, wonderful human being. He really is a nice guy.
You would almost need TV style production to capture what he does, because there's so much nuance and there's so many of the different angles you need to do it. And so like I said, that was really fun, and to see someone use terrain like that. I'm a terrain skeptic, to be honest with you. And I've seen how we do it at our table, which is fine. But when I think convention or I think stream, I'm like, this seems so clunky and so much downtime. But when he does it, he's so fast with it and so practiced. And he's but when I do it at a convention, I have my assistant with me, and it's it's even faster. So it's just there's no break.
And he's okay, and so now you arrive at, and then the person hands the terrain to him. Boom. So he doesn't. It's this very smooth transition. And he does effects, with the teddy bear one. We were traveling through time, so we all had to put our hands onto one of those, those electrical ball things with the lightning. So we all had to put our hands, and then, and then they turned the lights on. Right, you're in the future now, and then they're all that kind of. It kind of sounds cheesy when you describe it, but when you're there, the effect of what he's doing is incredible. It really is fantastic. And if you have an opportunity to go and play in a DM Scotty game at a convention, do not pass that up, because it's one of the best things you'll ever do in your life.
Well, yeah, it's the difference between watching a concert on TV and being there. You can see it, and it's okay, it's cool. It's live music, so it's not as good as recorded music, and you see what's going on. But when you're there, the fact that it's live as opposed to not being recorded is totally missed by you, and you get because you're engrossed in the energy of being there live. And a lot of live events have that, concerts, high level performances, you might see it a circus, that kind of stuff. They all have their own kind of energy to it. And that's how I kind of describe the DM Scotty style game, the difference of watching it and being there. And I mean, there's other DMs that are like that as well.
I mean, we've done a couple of videos on the Quest Givers channel where we talk about streaming, and we talked about Critical Role, and of course, you mentioned Critical Role, you're going to get flack. Um, but it's a legitimate concern for me. Is that we are really before even the infancy of streaming games, and you know, part of what makes something acceptable in society is that ordinary people will watch it and will be entertained by it. Um, and Critical Role does that to some extent, but it also still kind of feels like it needs more. And streaming in general, because at the moment it's still like talking heads. It needs some of the terrain. It needs some more of that kind of aspect to it. And there's not a lot of people who incorporate terrain into live streams. They do the sort of virtual tabletops, but again, it's a top-down thing.
Mm-hmm.
And my new videos that I'm creating for the DMG, there's 8 of them that are coming out in the first series. My terrain is focused on this is how you play online with terrain, and I've basically changed the way that I approach terrain so that it is an online experience, but still works on the tabletop. So you can still have people in front of you and people online. So you have a kind of it's more inclusive of your friends who've moved away can still play in your game, because obviously I have more friends that live overseas than I have living in the same city as me. So my gaming buddies are stretched all over the world. So my terrain, there's very few people who've played on my terrain. There's maybe like 5 or 6 people that have played on my terrain. But I'd like to expand that experience and bring more people from my community into that experience. And that's really what I'm going to focus on more with my new videos.
You know what Critical Role should do? Because they do break out the terrain for like the combats and different situations. That would be cool if they got tiny cameras that fit on the miniatures that were wireless. And so they could switch between the point of view from the different minis in the terrain that they are using. And, obviously we're not there yet, but I imagine at some point the technology will get there.
Well, my channel, the videos are basically get a webcam, stick it in front of your terrain, and so it's a first-person perspective as rather than a top-down perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And the shift in thinking then is it's no longer a tactical thing, because top-down is okay. Where am I? And the terrain is you're just filling it with stuff, whereas when you to change it to a first person or third person perspective, I think is probably a more correct term. But when you change it to as we're looking now, and you say, well, this would be the terrain behind me, right? You become a lot more thematic in what you're doing, because now you're telling a story with the terrain, as opposed to it merely just being, okay, you're over here by this table. It's now I can actually use terrain for the things that you would normally not use terrain for. Because normally if you're going into the town to shop and buy a sword, you wouldn't use terrain for that. But now you can, because you can show the town. Here is the town and the marketplace that you're in. And that is kind of my shift in what I'm thinking for terrain, is to make it more thematic and narrative in what it's for, rather than tactical and combat oriented. And that I feel, and it's just my personal opinion, that people who are terrain skeptics like yourself, they may be more inclined to go, that's quite cool, I would like that experience, because it's actually telling a story, and I can see the marketplace, and I can see the space station, and I can see the battleship, and the foot of the dragon that's we're fighting or whatever. You've got that kind of experience, which really no one at this point that I know of is doing things like. There's people who have Dwarven Forge and they put a camera in it, but that's a little bit different.
I think we'll get there. I mean, really,
Yeah.
we're in the infancy of streaming. Like Critical Role, they launched in 2015, essentially a year after we started. So, and with them, it's been snowballing with their popularity more and more. There's so many more people watching. So many more people watching that never even play the game. They just watch, people stream it now. And you see that coming up. So I imagine at some point someone's going to start doing that. It's going to be more high end, and as more money pours into the industry, then we'll
Yeah.
start seeing it. Maybe you should pitch your idea to Wizards of the Coast, man. They're the only ones out there right now that have the capital to make something like that happen.
Well, but that's also part of it is there's only one game. It's
Yeah.
like, it's when you look at sports, how many different sports are there, right? So, that's really what, when I think about it, I think about it from a standpoint of there's a lot of people who watch sports who don't play sports, right? So if you're going to make it an entertaining thing, you got to look at what other forms of entertainment have come before and what sort of techniques and things do they use. And you don't need to use all of those techniques, but you can borrow some of the ideas from that to push the thing forward. But of course, like anyone who's a true fanboy of something, they're going to go, oh, you can't change what the thing is. But things change all the day. Like everything is constantly changing, and to think, oh, well, that's just going to ruin what it is. I don't think so. I think anything that's honestly trying to make the experience better for more people is a good thing. I mean, there are points when you can go too far and there's too much money involved and things like that that can sour some projects. But we wouldn't have the Marvel Cinematic Universe if money was the thing that corrupted all stuff. I mean, Star Wars is a complete disaster for some people, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe was not. So same company.
Yeah. True. But I mean, at the end of the day, though, RPGs are such a small niche. For so it's going to take a while. But as it grows, who knows? I mean, there are more people playing tabletop games than ever. And I feel like too, like like you said, there's like one game D&D. But as that grows, I feel like there's a lag to other people will start going into other games. It's the gateway drug. D&D is the marijuana of the
Yeah.
RPG community, and they've got brand recognition. It's a brand that is far outstripped the
You're
game or
not just
what it
selling
is.
smack on the corners.
Yeah, they have dispensaries.
Yeah.
No, because because if you say Cipher System or Shadowrun or even Pathfinder, and to a Muggle, they have no idea what you're talking about.
No.
But if you say Dungeons and Dragons, they're like, oh, that's that nerdy shit or whatever.
Yeah.
In their mind, it conjures something.
Yeah.
Where the other things not so much. And Pathfinder
Brand.
was the worst branding ever. Like,
Yeah.
because
Because isn't that Mars mission?
no, it's the
that
car
car?
from Nissan. It's a cool name, but it wasn't well thought out as far as the wider spectrum of things.
Yeah, look, I mean, Dungeons and Dragons really evokes what it is. That Pathfinder doesn't really evoke what it is. It's like swords and sorcery. It kind of tells you exactly what it is.
Well, I would say it's even more so is like if you go with something that's already been branded well, like you've got no, and like you kind of come from me and you come from a little bit of similar background. Like when we were thinking of names and what we were going to do as far as a website and a YouTube channel, like part of our thought was also SEO and how
Yeah.
people were going to find the thing, right?
But look, when I started the DMG, I did not think that there'd be hundreds of videos on the thing. I thought I'd make 10 or 12 and
Yeah.
I'd see where it was at. And, when I got 200 subscribers in the first week, I was like, okay, well, I kind of know what I'm talking about when I talk to other people and tell them to do this stuff. It does actually work. I've seen it work on other people's stuff and now it's working on mine. So I know that it actually works. But the one, today, and I know we're running out of time, but today YouTube is not the same thing it was all those years ago. The tactics and the tips and all those sort of things have changed significantly. And not even YouTube knows how YouTube works. So anyone who tells you, "Oh, this is how you become good on YouTube," they don't know what they're talking about because not even YouTube can tell you how it actually works. So it's every day is a learning experience on this platform.
Yeah.
And the key component is community. That's what you guys have. And that's what I try to get in across my channels is a community of people who like what I do. Because a community of people who like what I do are people who are going to stick by you and, they're going to, help you create, get by, do whatever, because they eventually will become like friends, and they have, quite literally.
Yeah, it is it's an odd thing, especially the YouTube scene. Like there's this whole category of advice that works more or less better when you're starting out, but after you hit a certain point, it becomes immaterial and pointless. It doesn't really matter at all.
Yeah.
Like,
If you've got 200,000 subscribers, the keyword thing doesn't make any difference. It makes no difference whatsoever.
I
But
actually,
when you
I
get
think
2,000 subscribers, it makes a big difference.
I think it's even much lower than the 200,000. I would
Yeah.
say. There just becomes a certain point where the algorithm means less and less, or it's not that it means less and less, but it's powered by a different thing. It's powered by velocity more than anything. So, so the secret to being popular on YouTube is being popular.
Well, velocity used to be, but you'll find now what's happening, because I've got thousands of videos like you do, but I've got it across different topics. So that's where you and I differ. But what I tend to find is some old videos that have been around for years are now getting tens of thousands of views where they didn't have more than 2,000 or 3,000 before. So, when something is found and it begins to blow up and you've got a catalog of videos on the internet, then you can suddenly explode, that 10 years of hard work to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
Well, that's true. And sometimes too, it's not even your channel that does a thing, right? We did a video about character death, and it was like I wouldn't say stag. It was where it was at, right? And it was kind of like steady there. But then all of a sudden, it started blowing up. I'm like, what the hell's going on? So I had to poke around. And I was like, oh, Matt Mercer did a video about character death. So so that video was probably getting shown as suggested alongside it. Afterwards, so people are watching. Well, this is what Matt had to say. What do these guys have to say? And then we noticed the spike on that. So yeah, YouTube is just a weird and mystifying place.
It always comes down to making good content that people want to watch. That is the forefront of anything that you do, and build a community. If you don't have those two elements, then no matter how you try to game the system, it's never going to work. It just never will. You'll never get past a certain point.
Yeah, it doesn't matter the platform, but the one thing that always comes to mind for me is content is king, and then everything else kind of comes from after that. So we're up on the hour. Any final thoughts before we head on out?
Go to nerdarchy.com and buy their stuff. Keep them alive.
We support that message.
Well, this message brought to you by.
Well, Gareth, thanks for coming on. I always enjoy chatting with you, and everyone else, thanks for hanging out with us. Until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.